Hello, my name is Bob Brown, and it's my privilege to host this show, which is based on the reality that Westborough is a great town filled with interesting people. Many of them are long-term residents who have so many memories and stories about life in Westborough in days gone past. And so your local cable station, Westborough TV, has initiated this series of programs which are designed to reflect upon life in earlier days and to possibly make suggestions about how we can improve life in this fine town for the future. Here we go again, another Westborough story, and this time we're very fortunate to have with us Jim Tepper, who is going to tell us a little bit about his early childhood and where he went to school, and then we'll get into some further discussions about life here in Westborough and throughout the world. So, welcome, Jim. Thank you for coming and being willing to do this.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for asking me.
Tell me how you began.
How I began.
How you began, from the beginning.
Began too many years ago. I was born in Winchendon, up in the northern part of the state. My folks were living in both Orange and Northampton at the time. My father ran a retail 5 and 10 cent store, but he and his two brothers had 4 or 5 of them. And so he was in Northampton when my mother was staying with family in Orange. Time came and I went to Winchendon. So enough about that. We grew up in Northampton. Northampton's out on the Connecticut River, western part of the state. Went through school there and went on to Springfield College, which is just south of Northampton.
Great.
Went to school expecting to get into a scouting career. Did quite a bit with the Boy Scouts and thought being a scout executive might be a fun
Is that
thing
right?
to be. So I got into a recreation management program. Began to waver as that went on. Played some sports, played in a band. My life began to change a little bit. A recruiter came on campus, and I was intrigued with the PLC program that the Marine Corps had. So signed up for the PLC program.
Now, is that like ROTC or something? Is that a summer experience, or what is that?
Well, at the time, the PLC program was summer. That's when you would do your, quote, basic training.
Okay.
There were some advantages to the program. If you signed up, went through the summer program, your pay date began that day, so you got an extra year or two on your pay scale. That really only helped if you were going to stay in for a while, as I did. We went to Quantico for 2 8-week training programs. So I went down the summer of my sophomore year and summer of my junior year, and then got my commission at graduation. I believe the program has changed a bit now, so that there is some activity throughout the year, whether there's a monthly meeting, there's some educational stipend that goes along with the program, and there may be a meeting or some gathering that is conducted throughout the year, but the primary training is summertime down at Quantico.
You were introduced to this program on campus?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did others, large numbers join? Or
well, in my graduating class, there were 2 of us that got commissioned. I can't honestly say whether there was anybody else that started the program and didn't finish, because there were some washouts that went through through basic. There were other services they were recruiting as well, so they didn't necessarily have the commissioning at the graduation. At our class night ceremonies, matter of fact, that's when we were commissioned. So I mean, at the time, it was a big deal. Had the family down and so forth.
Yeah, great. In my time in college, there was the ROTC, Air Force ROTC program, which, as I remember, all of us as freshmen had to take it for the first 2 years, and then after that, it was elective as to whether you continued on or whether they accept you or not. So.
Yeah, there was no mandatory program, to my recollection, at Springfield. This was a voluntary program. Of course, I started there in '63, and so you're talking early '60s as the. But there was activities, starting up, but there was less focus on it, in my recollection, on the Vietnam situation at the time.
Let me back you up a bit. You talked about the scouting program. Had you been in Scouts yourself?
Yes.
Well, you had?
I, as a little kid, Cub Scouts. Mother was a Cub leader. Went through Boy Scouts. I became a Boy Scout leader. Worked at Scout Camp when I was in high school.
Good for you.
Went off to Philmont, which is a spot out in New Mexico. Was a senior leader on a 3-week trip to go out there.
Great.
I went through.
That's interesting. Scouting was a very important part of my life. I grew up in it.
It did. It added quite a bit. I was quite fortunate. We had an Explorer post that we started, and so back when Explorer was really branching into its current phase, and we ended up getting a surplus truck from Westover from the Air Force and fixing that up and
Great.
We'd do projects and so
Yeah.
forth. So we were kind of a maverick.
Yeah,
Explorer
that's great.
post, if you will, at the time.
That's great.
That was all. We would fought some forest fires and
Yeah.
things like that.
Good for you. Did you find that experience helped you in the Marine Corps?
I think so.
Yeah.
You clearly have to be a bit independent. You have to be self-sufficient, and you know, a little bit of organization. I think that's always something that's helpful.
Yeah. So let's get into the Marine Corps now. Let's help me understand exactly what that was about for you. What?
Well, when I get into the PLC program, they had clearly, it's called platoon leaders class, and you know, the platoon is the basic. There's a squad, and then there, you know, platoon is the basic structure of the Marine Corps. But they also had a PLC air program, and of course the brochures, the pictures, and the attraction to flying was interesting. So I took the physical and the range of battery of tests that they administer to see if you can get into that program, and I was fortunate enough to pass that. Went down to Westover and spent an entire day with physical and spatial relations and height and weight and all the types of things. So I went through the air program. Not that my summer training was any different. It was
No, but you had
exactly
the
same.
basic training to start with, correct?
Basic training.
Yeah.
So then when I left after my commissioning, I went to Pensacola, Florida. And Pensacola is the Naval Air Training Command. And the Marine Corps is a part of the the Navy, and so that's where we went through together.
Yeah.
So we were.
Was that elective? Did you volunteered for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're intrigued with the flying
I was
aspect.
intrigued with flying and,
Yeah,
and
great.
wanted to go in that direction. Certainly thought that you know, the idea of flying a jet was quite intriguing at the time. And so the films and the pictures and the brochures were more intriguing than, let's put it this way, than the helicopters. But as you go through a different range of phases at Training Command, there's a quota for which advanced school you're going to go to. And at the time I was going through in '67 into '68, things were heating up overseas, and so the quotas for fixed wing in the Marine Corps dropped to 0 for a number of weeks, actually a number of months in a row. And so regardless of how you performed in the what they call ground school, where we took engines and weather and navigation and tactics and so forth, as well as the flying elements, didn't matter whether you were first or last, you were going to end up going to helicopters, which I did. So we went off and flew a little small H-11, then flew the 13, which was a Sikorsky tail dragging helicopter.
Let me interrupt you. Tail dragging means what?
Well, it's got a little small wheel at the tail, and so it hangs at
Oh, I
the
see.
back
Okay.
end. They've changed the design a little bit now, so you're landing much more horizontal, if you will.
Yeah.
Although to some degree the Black Hawk has a little bit of that design, being a Sikorsky frame. But I moved on from Pensacola, cut my wings, and headed out to what they call the fleet. So you go out into an operational squadron. And the Marine Corps has got 3 wings, you know, 1, 2, and 3. First was over in Vietnam at the time. Third was in the West Coast, and second is on the East Coast. I've been in all 3 of the wings in my career, but I headed out to California. And so you end up at a base, you go into the group and settle in, and they kind of assign you to a squadron. And I was assigned to a medium helicopter squadron, which was flying the CH-46. Which is the tandem rotor,
Okay.
Boeing built.
Bigger one, yeah.
Civilian model was a 107, but it's a carries about 25 troops, combat ready troops. Put a couple of small jeeps in, some Ontos, a range of equipment and so forth. So it was a
big machine.
It was sizable. I've forgotten all the specifications
Well,
in terms of lift and so forth
yeah.
and size. But went into that squadron, then began to get further training, fleet training, if you will. While we were there, those squadrons end up flying either local disaster. There were mudslides in California while I was there. We spent a week going out, picking up and retrieving and moving people around from mudslide. Is that part of training? Certainly that's all just part of operational training. Camp Pendleton was to the south, so we supported the ground troops down there, so we went down on operations. A lot of amphibious landings onto the Pendleton beaches down there that you've probably seen in the news over the years. And so those all got rolled into our training to a great degree. Left there and went to the East Coast. I was headed overseas and had a health issue in the family and got delayed for a short while. And then went to Jacksonville, North Carolina, where Marine Corps has an air station called New River. That air station is just south of Camp Lejeune, and so there are ground troops on Lejeune as well. Sure. And so we had operations in support of them, training. The squadrons there were rotating out onto what they called a cruise, a 3 or 4 month cruise down into the Caribbean. Did a lot at Gitmo and at QB. And because I was attached back to the family with my wife's health problem, I stayed back. So I moved to 3 different squadrons while I was there. Then got my orders overseas and went west. I went west, as they say. Ended up in Okinawa, which was the wing headquarters, and then was deployed onto a helicopter carrier and joined a squadron that was in what they call the Marine Amphibious Unit. It was a composite squadron, so there were Hueys, we had Cobras, gunships, regular Hueys, 46s and 53s, as well as a couple of hundred Marines in a reinforced.
At what stage were we in the war at that time? How many years in had we been in?
Oh, well, this is going to be 69, late 69, so we'd been engaged for a
couple of years.
Certainly in 63, even some of the skirmishes started, but it began escalating right on through. So this is fall 69, summer and fall 69 when I got there. And I stayed on that carrier and the second carrier because I transitioned from one squadron to the next, and stayed 11 months on the carrier, which was cruising up and down the coast, and we'd have operations from the carrier, and in many respects. But it was when I came back, and I've flown the reserves back here for many years, a number of my counterparts back here would be at different ground bases. A couple were on the carrier at different times, and we'd always just try to contrast which was better. Did you get better missions sitting on the ground, but you didn't have the best living quarters, or did you come back to the boat? So it's always a toss-up. But it was interesting.
How much time did you actually spend in Vietnam?
I was there a year.
A year?
Yeah. Rotated out after a year. That was the normal rotation that was going on at the time. A little bit different than what we're seeing now in Afghanistan and Iraq tours, where they're short troops and they're extending folks, bringing them back, rotating them back,
sending them back again.
Stays.
Yeah.
Young kids these days, it's really a challenge.
Brutal
Challenge for them.
Yeah.
They had a 1 year in, 3 year out policy back when I was at that stage. But I only went over one time. I came back and then got out in 71. So.
Well, that's a remarkable story in the sense that you certainly saw the world. And
certainly did get to see the world. Got to see a lot of interesting things. A couple of times we were on the boat and we didn't get kicked to the beach because the Navy has different standards. After a while, they need to take their ships back in and, I don't know, get new air filters on them or something. I'm not exactly sure what they do. So they cruised back to the Philippines. One time they cruised to Taiwan. maybe the Navy just wanted to give liberty to the sailors. I'm not exactly sure,
Yeah.
but some of the squadrons before us would get booted off to the beach. 3 different times they kept us aboard. So we get to the Philippines, we got to Taiwan. We also went down to Singapore one time. So you go in for 2 days, 2.5 days, and then you're back out. So, in a way, that's our R&R time frame.
What were you doing primarily in Vietnam in terms of flying? Were you bringing troops in, bringing troops out?
We were doing inserts of troops, recon inserts, extractions, resupply, medevac. It was a range. I mean, you're really just a truck driver, truck driver in the air. And each of those missions takes a different planning approach and a different set of criteria, whether it's at nighttime or whether you've got to go in under fire, whether you're coming in with cover, whether you're going in by yourself. Some was administrative, moving some material from Extra Y, going picking up some mail, going in, picking up some officers that were doing some planning that needed to come out and coordinate with the Navy gunfire and so forth. But it was right.
How do you handle your emotions when you're going into a fire situation?
If you're young, you probably don't think of it the way you and I are thinking about it right now. I've thought many times about that. There's an elitism that gets bred. There is an invincibility. I can do this, not a problem. Our challenge was to try to fly within our capabilities as opposed to exceed them. Try to fly within the capabilities of the airframe rather than exceed it, as opposed to, do I really want to go do this or not? We all were very glib, very sarcastic, very quick-witted, if you will, and that's what kind of kept the edge, rounded off, if you will. It was interesting. We had a couple of missions. We had one where you get briefed, and it was a volunteer mission. Anybody that didn't want to go could not go. And of course, it's one of those things where you're in the middle of a crowd.
Yeah,
there's a little bit.
You're not going to say I'm not going.
A little bit of a crowd mentality.
Yeah.
But then you're encouraged. We wrote letters, left the letters with the chaplain back there, and goods didn't have any identification. We're heading into the North Vietnam, into Vinh, and that was about a 3-week ramp-up, build-up operation, and it did end up changing to North Vietnamese divisions from a particular attack that they were going to have, and they changed direction. But it's an interesting experience to go through. No question. We're cruising in. We had Russian trawlers on all sides of us, popping around, and it just gets to be second nature after a while. So
yeah,
so that whole attitude, though, came back, and that's what I found when I came back and joined the reserves. I got back here in '71. And was over at the University of Mass and bumped into a fellow that I'd been stationed with in California. And he happened to live in Florence, which is a part of Northampton, and was in a reserve outfit flying out of South Weymouth. And so we got chatting. After bumping into him a few times, he says, "Why don't you come down and fly?" And I said, "All right." So I went down and joined up with the reserve. So I continued flying, from that point onward.
Yeah.
Everybody in the squadron had been overseas, and so that was a kind of a fraternity atmosphere. But you also, got to relax a little. A lot different than the folks that are in the reserve and National Guard outfits in the last number of years.
That's
right. That really have a much higher incidence of being called up.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not that didn't happen with us. My squadron was called up in the first Gulf War.
Was it really?
I had moved on at that point to being the commanding officer of a Marine Air Base squadron, which was stationed at South Weymouth. So I was still flying with the squadron, but I had a squadron of support folks, and that squadron was not called up. So
okay, but you could have been.
And 771 got called up in the helicopters. Almost all helicopters left. It just changed the dynamics for a while. But that was kind of the first wake up for the reserves, because for years the reserves had just been kind of a quiet, you're there in reserve, if you will, and not up in the forefront.
Now, you mentioned your wife, Alice. You had some children. Tell us about that part of your life.
Yeah, 2 boys. I met Alice when I was in flight school. She's a Floridian. She's from the Tampa area, and we've got 2 boys, Chuck and Steve. Chuck went off, and he spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. Ended up going into the recon. Spent a lot of time in Pendleton, and so some of the operations that I had in the reserves, where we'd summertime go out to California, spend a couple of weeks at Camp Pendleton with operations and so forth. I got to see him, loaded him aboard on a couple of missions, and
Is that right?
took him up. Matter of fact, he was up with me flying one time when we got an actual medevac call. Went up to a Pinnacle Peak, some fellow, and he and the crew chief jumped out to go and get this kid, and he was, you know, he had dehydration, and so they watered him down and they cooled him down, hauled him aboard. We took him off to the hospital. I had another lieutenant colonel with me at the time, and so Ronnie wrote him up. Went through the system. Chuck reports many weeks later that, you know, he got significantly harassed when he got back in his recon outfit. Because here he was, you know, all the recons, of course, they stay way the heck out in the boonies. The whole outfit had to fall out for a full formation just so they could read this little piece of paper. He didn't get over that too quickly.
Right.
I mean, he was certainly proud to get it, but it took a while.
Yeah.
They want to know why he was off flying when he could have been, you know, shining his boots or
That's right.
cleaning his weapon, whatever the case was.
Right.
But that was, you know, a lot of those kinds of things would happen. So Alice, you know, was great in watching the kids while I was able to go off and do these things. You know, interesting. You remember the blizzard of '76, was it?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Blizzard of '78.
I can remember. 78.
78. We had just gotten to town. And I was flying. We got the call as soon as you know, the roads all closed down. I left the next day. Somehow plowed my way out of town on shut down highways all the way to Weymouth, and spent 4.5 days flying, picking people up, taking them to hospitals, and so forth. And left her back home here. So fortunately, we've got nice neighbors that were able to, you know, climb over the snow piles and bring her food and take care of it. Of course, the kids thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
That's right.
But she was as much a part of me being able to do that as not.
Now tell me about Steve.
Steve, the younger boy, and both boys went through the school system here. And he went on to Maine to play football. Went there on a football scholarship and ended up switching over to a hockey scholarship after he got drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks. And then went on to play professional for about 5 years. Came back and has lived in both Northborough and Shrewsbury for the last 10 years, 12 years, working for quite a while for the Ice Cats that were in Worcester, and now for a firm here in town. He's got a couple of boys that are certainly heavy into hockey, and he coaches 3 teams. Plays in a men's league every couple of nights a week throughout the year. Matter of fact, he and Jimmy are on a team. I guess they play on a team together in one part of the year and play
fight against each other.
So it's I'll punch you tonight and I'll punch you tomorrow. That's all.
That's right.
But they, of course, they were in hockey together. You know.
Well, it's that hockey shared experience, I think, that has caused us to be together quite a bit.
Right.
But we had a very interesting episode. Jim talks about being in the reserves, and we have a place way up in northern Maine on a lake, a very small little lake. We're about the only one on our side of the lake, and we saw in the paper that there was going to be an international air show at the Holton International Airport. Now, the Holton International Airport gained its notoriety during the Second World War when, because of a treaty that Canada had about, I guess, neutrality, they couldn't accept, they couldn't become military stocked by flying planes in, but they could accept them if they came in without being flown. So, well, to hear that there's going to be now an air show at the international airport, we couldn't miss that. So we bundled in the car and went out, and the biggest thing at the airport was this huge helicopter. and standing next to the helicopter was Jim Tepper. And we said, what the heck is he doing up here? How did we ever come across this situation? We had a nice talk and explained where our camp was, and I don't know whether he had seen the lake when he came in or not, but he made it a point that when he left, he buzzed the camp, and I still think there are people laying in the prone in the woods, scared to death. What is this noise? And it was quite an experience to see this huge helicopter come wheeling over the treetop to the camp. That was great. So Jim and I have been good friends ever since.
Yeah, we think back to, I mean, all part of that experience in the reserve was there's certainly a bit more of an aggressiveness in terms of flying and regulation, what's enjoyable and so forth. We did lots of low-level flying, nap of the earth flying when we were overseas, and you do some training in that regard. Clearly you come back and read the manuals and regulations, and you got a 500-foot clearance here and a 1,000-foot clearance here and a 3,000-foot clearance here, and so forth. And some of that gets almost like driving a bus. That gets a little bit less exciting. Yeah. So when you're off in the wild, I'll call it, it was
wild. You were in the wild.
Certainly interesting to get down and see how many pine cones you can shake loose, or how many cactuses you can come close to as you're going through the desert. And we've done that a few times.
I bet you have.
We had. I made 9 trips across the country in a Huey.
Wow.
And for varying reasons, varying operations, and then numerous trips down to Florida, down to Georgia, down to Pensacola, and certainly down to North Carolina in that area. So up and down the East Coast. So, but it was all very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On a sadder note, Jim and I share another common situation. My wife died 2 years ago on November 20th, 2008 from Alzheimer's. And Jim's wife also has Alzheimer's. She's now a resident at Beaumont Nursing Home. It's been a long struggle for Alice and for Jim. I feel for them, they've been carrying on a long, long time with this horrific disease. So we share this common bond in that sense. And I think, Jim, at some point, maybe later on, we could think about doing something like this again, where we can talk a little bit about what it's been like as caregivers in this kind of situation, and maybe to help some other people through the situation, because it's a terrible, terrible experience. But
I don't disagree with you at all, and I think that's a great idea. I think the station and with your direction, that would be a great thing. You know what the value is that comes out of these groups that we continue to attend, to folks that can kind of hear somebody else talk about going through that, or bounce some ideas off of people.
That's right.
It has been a tremendous support to your guidance, and your level hand has been of a great assistance.
Well, take the kudos yourself. Jim has been very active with the Alzheimer's Association in helping raise funds to fight this terrible disease, and you're very active in that through the memory walks and this sort of thing, and your golf tournaments and other things that you've done. So you've done yeoman's work for them. That's great. I appreciate that. Well, I haven't been as loyal as you have to that, but
no. But you get by giving, and that's certainly something that I've enjoyed doing, and continues to plod forward. But you know, there's a whole range of emotion. There's a whole range of need, if you will, that surrounds a number of different issues. We start talking about military and folks being away from home, and then we then talk about folks that are with a family, but you're still away. I mean, it's almost the same thing.
That's right.
You're close, but you're not there. Just before we started, there was comment about homesickness and so forth. Well, you know, homesickness and not being able to communicate with a family member sometimes can be in parallel. You long for what it used to be. Yeah. In many respects.
Well, I appreciate the service you gave for your country. I appreciate the service you're giving for this town. I appreciate the service you're giving to the Alzheimer's Association. And this program is now being televised or recorded on Election Day, November 2nd. And one of the things that Jim fought for, and the rest of us should be really exercising, is our responsibility to vote. So I hope that not only for today, but years to come, that we pay due to the veterans who've granted us this freedom in this country to be free, and they exercise that responsibility and vote. So, Jim, I want to thank you for your willingness to come in.
Thank you.
Sharing your story with me. You're a good man. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.